Emma's fingers moved quickly across the holographic display, adjusting the shield frequency numbers for the 10th time that day. The soft blue light from the screen lit up her tired face in the dimly lit lab. Outside her window, the massive defense platforms of Earth Command stretched into the night sky, their lights twinkling like artificial stars. Shield simulation test number 47, she spoke clearly into her recorder. Running at maximum power. The test chamber in front of her hummed to life. A small model of Earth's defense satellite floated in the center, surrounded by a faint blue barrier. Emma held her breath as the testing beam hit the shield. For 3 seconds, everything worked perfectly. Then, like all the times before, the shield flickered and failed. She sighed and leaned back in her chair, her eyes catching the old photo on her desk. It showed 2 kids, both around 12 years old, playing with toy spaceships in a backyard. The memory came back to her as clear as yesterday. "No, Tom, you can't just fly straight at the enemy," young Emma had shouted, waving her toy ship in complex patterns. "You need to think about angles and energy fields." Thomas had just laughed, his bright eyes full of excitement. "Sometimes the direct approach is the best. Watch this." He had crashed his ship right through her carefully planned defense setup, sending toy ships flying everywhere. Now, 15 years later, Emma wondered where he was. His family had left for the Nova colony when they were 13, joining the ambitious space colonization program. The last message she'd received from him was 5 years ago, a short video about his graduation from the colony's space academy. A loud beep from her computer snapped her back to the present. The screen flashed red with an urgent message. ALERT. Unknown objects detected at edge of solar system. All defense personnel report to stations. Emma quickly saved her work and grabbed her tablet. As she hurried through the corridors of Earth Command, screens everywhere showed the same images, multiple objects, moving fast, approaching from the direction of Alpha Centauri. "Hayes," a voice called out. Emma turned to see Director Miller rushing toward her. "We need those shields operational. The objects we're tracking. They're big, bigger than anything we've seen before." "I'm close to a breakthrough, sir," Emma said, pulling up her latest test results. "The shield matrix is stable, but we're losing power too quickly. If I could just—" Another alarm cut through the air, this one louder and more urgent. The corridor's lights turned red. Multiple objects just dropped out of hyperspace near Jupiter, someone shouted from the control room. "They're ships. Definitely not human design." Emma rushed to the window. Even from Earth, she could see new stars appearing in the sky. Except these stars were moving, and they were getting bigger. "Hayes," Director Miller's voice was dead serious now. "How long do you need?" Emma thought about all her failed tests, about the shield that kept failing after 3 seconds. She thought about Thomas and their childhood games, about how he always said sometimes you had to take the direct approach. "Give me 12 hours, she said firmly. "I think I know what we've been doing wrong. We've been trying to make the perfect shield, but what we need is a shield that can fail in the right way." "You have 6 hours, Miller replied. "After that, we'll have to work with what we've got." Emma nodded and ran back to her lab. As she pulled up her shield designs, her eyes caught the old photo again. Somewhere out there, Thomas was probably living his own life, maybe even had his own family now. She hoped the Nova colony was far enough away to be safe from whatever was coming. Little did she know, as she worked through the night to protect Earth, that her childhood friend was closer than she thought, and their paths were about to cross again in the most unexpected way. The alien ships looked like giant silver arrowheads against the black of space. Through Earth Command's main window, Emma watched as they moved past Mars, their metal hulls gleaming in the sunlight. Her new shield design was being uploaded to Earth's defense platforms, but she couldn't stop her hands from shaking. "First contact," someone whispered in the crowded control room. "After all these years of wondering, they're finally here." A voice crackled through every speaker in the building, speaking perfect English. "People of Earth, we are the Auroran Empire. Your world now falls within our territory. Surrender your defensive capabilities and accept our rule or face elimination. Director Miller stood at the command console, his face grim. Send our response. This is Earth Command. We are a free and sovereign world. We will not surrender. Emma held her breath. For 10 long seconds, nothing happened. Then the first alien ship fired. The blast of energy was bigger than anything they had seen in their simulations. It hit the shield above North America, and Emma's heart stopped as she waited to see if her design would hold. The shield flickered blue, absorbed the blast, and held. It works, Emma shouted, pulling up the shield data on her tablet. The energy distribution is stable. But the Aurorans weren't done. More ships appeared from hyperspace, dozens of them, forming a ring around Earth. They all fired at once. Emma's shields held, but the strain was enormous. We can't take this kind of punishment for long, she reported, watching the power levels drop. Maybe 20 minutes at most. Where are our ships? Miller demanded. Earth's defense fleet was good, but they were outnumbered 5-1. Suddenly, new alerts lit up the screens. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. The sensor operator called out, coming in from the direction of Alpha Centauri. Emma's heart sank. More Auroran ships would mean the end. But when the ships appeared, they weren't silver arrowheads. They were Earth ships, but unlike any she had ever seen. The new vessels were sleek and dark, marked with the symbol of the Nova colony. They moved with incredible speed, their engines leaving trails of blue fire as they engaged the Auroran fleet. This is Nova Colony Battle Group 1, a familiar-sounding voice transmitted. Earth Command, hold those shields. We'll handle the Aurorans. Emma watched in amazement as the Nova ships executed perfect attack formations. They moved like dancers, striking at the Auroran weak points and pulling back before the aliens could respond. It reminded her of something, but she couldn't quite place it. Their attack pattern, she muttered, watching the main screen. It's just like. Her eyes widened as she remembered her childhood games with Thomas, the way they would plan their pretend space battles. The Nova ships split into 3 groups, 2 attacking from the sides while one group drove straight through the middle, exactly like Thomas used to do with his toy ships. Director, Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. I think I know who's leading those ships. Before she could explain, the Auroran fleet's formation broke. Several of their ships exploded, their silver hulls cracking apart in silent bursts of light. The rest began to pull back, their retreat covered by wild energy blasts that Emma's shields easily deflected. Earth Command. The Nova Colony commander transmitted again. Your shields are impressive. They're quite different from our technology, but they're exactly what we needed to complete this trap. Would it be possible to speak with whoever designed them? Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding. This is Emma Hayes, shield designer. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh came through the speakers. Hello, Em. It's been a while. The entire control room turned to look at her as Emma gripped her tablet tighter, tears in her eyes. Hello, Tom. You always did like the direct approach. Emma stood in Earth Command's main docking bay, watching the Nova Colony shuttle land. Her heart was beating so fast she could barely stand still. 15 years was a long time, and people change. Would Thomas be completely different now? The shuttle's door opened with a soft hiss. A tall man in a dark blue uniform stepped out, his commander's insignia gleaming under the bay lights. Emma almost didn't recognize him until he smiled, that same bright, confident smile from their childhood. Your shield design saved a lot of lives today, Thomas said, walking towards her. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly looking unsure. It's good to see you, Em. Emma wanted to be professional, to treat this like any other military meeting. Instead, she found herself stepping forward and hugging him tightly. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? All these years, and not a single message about being a fleet commander. Thomas hugged her back, then stepped away to look at her properly. Security protocols. The Nova colony has been tracking the Auroran Empire for the past 3 years. We couldn't risk them intercepting any communications. Director Miller cleared his throat behind them. Commander Reed, while this reunion is touching, we need to discuss our tactical situation. The Aurorans will be back, and in greater numbers. They moved to the war room, where holographic displays showed the positions of both Earth's forces and the Nova colony fleet. Emma couldn't help but notice how Thomas immediately focused on the tactical display, just like he used to focus on their toy battlefields. The Aurorans have a weakness, Thomas explained, pointing to the hologram. Their ships are powerful, but they're predictable. They always follow the same attack patterns we've studied for years. That's why your counterattacks work so well, Emma said, beginning to understand. You knew exactly where they would be. Thomas nodded, but we could never get close enough to do real damage. Their shields were too strong. He looked at Emma with pride. Until your design came along. The way your shields adapt and flex, it's exactly what we needed. Just like in the garden, Emma said softly. Remember, you always said my defenses were too rigid, that they needed to bend instead of break. The other officers looked confused, but Thomas laughed. You used our old games as inspiration. Some of the best tactical training I ever had, Emma admitted. She turned to Director Miller. Sir, I think I know how we can improve our defenses even further. The Nova colony ships have advanced targeting systems, right? Thomas caught on immediately. And if we combine those with your shield frequency modulators, we could create a synchronized defense network, Emma finished. The shields would work together, supporting each other just like your ships do in formation. Director Miller looked between them, then at the tactical display. How quickly can you make it happen? Give us 6 hours, they said at the same time, then looked at each other in surprise. Some things never change, Thomas said with a grin. You still think exactly like you used to. Emma pulled up her shield designs on the main screen. And you still want to charge straight at the enemy. Remember how many times that got your toy ships blown up. But it worked today, didn't it? Their playful argument was interrupted by new alerts. The long-range sensors were detecting more Auroran ships, at least twice as many as before. They'll be here in 8 hours, Miller announced. You have 6 hours to get your combined system working. After that, we'll need every ship and shield at full combat readiness. Emma and Thomas shared a look. They both knew that what they were attempting might not work, that combining two completely different technologies in 6 hours was almost impossible. But they also knew that they were no longer just two kids playing with toy ships in a garden. They were Earth's best chance for survival. And this time, the battle was real. The Nova colony flagship, Star Voyager, was nothing like Emma had imagined. As she walked through its corridors with Thomas, she saw technology that seemed years ahead of Earth's best designs. The walls gleamed with a strange metal that seemed to shift colors as they passed. Your ship is amazing, Emma said, running her hand along a control panel. How did the colony advance so quickly? Thomas stopped at a large window showing the Earth below, its surface partially covered by the shimmer of Emma's shields. Necessity. We encountered the Aurorans 2 years ago. They attacked one of our mining outposts. His face grew serious. We lost a lot of good people that day. They entered the ship's main engineering bay, where teams of technicians were already working to integrate Emma's shield designs with their systems. Holographic displays filled the air, showing complex energy patterns that Emma recognized from her research. Commander Reed. A young engineer rushed up to them. We're having trouble matching the shield frequencies. The power surge keeps overloading our targeting computers. Emma stepped forward, pulling up her data on a nearby screen. That's because you're trying to force the shields to match your power signature. We need to do it the other way around. She typed quickly, changing several parameters. The shields are designed to adapt. Let them find their own balance with your systems. Thomas watched her work with a mixture of pride and amusement, still solving problems the same way I remember when you rewired my toy spaceship to make it fly better. And I remember it exploding in your hand, Emma replied without looking up from her work. But I learned from that mistake. These calculations are much better. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared. Red lights flashed through the engineering bay. Advanced scout ships detected. The announcement echoed through the ship. All hands to battle stations. Thomas grabbed Emma's arm. How close are we to getting the combined systems working? Maybe 30 minutes. We need more time. We don't have it. Thomas pulled up a tactical display. 3 Auroran scout ships had appeared near Mars, clearly testing Earth's defenses. They're trying to find weaknesses in our formation. Emma watched as the scout ships fired their weapons. Her shields held, but she could see the strain in the power readings. The shields won't last as long against their main fleet. We need something new, something they won't expect. Thomas stared at the tactical display, then slowly smiled. What if we give them exactly what they expect? What do you mean? Remember that summer when we were 12? You created that fake weakness in your defense to trick me into attacking the wrong spot. Emma's eyes widened. You want to deliberately create a weak point in the shields. Not a real one, Thomas explained, getting excited. But if we make them think there's a vulnerability, we can control exactly where they attack. Emma finished his thought. Tom, that's brilliant. We can set up a resonance cascade that looks like shield failure, but actually strengthens the entire network. They said together, then laughed. The ship shook as another blast hit the shields. Through the window, they could see one of the Auroran scout ships moving closer, its silver hull glinting menacingly. We have maybe 20 minutes before they report back to their main fleet, Thomas said, checking his displays. Can you make the modifications in time? Emma was already working, her fingers flying over the controls. Just like old times, right? You create the distraction. And you make the trap, Thomas finished. Some things really don't change. Around them, the engineering bay was a flurry of activity as both Earth and Nova Colony crews worked together, racing against time. Through the windows, more Auroran ships were appearing, their weapons charging. Earth's fate would depend on whether 2 childhood friends could turn their old games into real battle tactics. And this time, there would be no second chances. The war room aboard the Star Voyager buzzed with activity as Emma and Thomas presented their plan to the combined Earth and Nova Colony commanders. The holographic display showed Earth surrounded by hundreds of tiny lights representing their defense platforms, all connected by Emma's shield network. The Aurorans think they know our weaknesses, Thomas said, pointing to the display. But they've never faced anything like this before. Emma stepped forward, highlighting several points in the shield network. We've created what appears to be a structural weakness here, and here. The enemy's scans will show these as vulnerable points in our defense. You want us to deliberately show weakness? Director Miller asked, his face concerned. That's extremely risky. It's not real weakness, Emma explained. She pressed a button, and the display changed to show energy flows through the shield network. When they hit these points, the shields won't fail. Instead, they'll capture and redirect the enemy's energy. Thomas picked up the explanation. Think of it like a funnel. We're not just defending anymore. We're going to use their own weapons against them. One of the Nova Colony officers raised her hand. Commander Reed, this plan depends on the Aurorans attacking exactly where we want them to. What if they don't take the bait? Thomas smiled. They will. Emma and I have studied every battle they fought. They always follow the same pattern, hit the weakest point with everything they have. Because it's always worked for them before, Emma added. They've never had a reason to change their tactics. The room grew quiet as the commanders considered the plan. Through the windows, they could see Earth's night side coming into view, cities glittering like scattered diamonds. How many ships do you need? Director Miller finally asked. All of them, Thomas replied. Every ship we have needs to be in exactly the right position. The timing has to be perfect. Emma pulled up a new simulation. The Nova Colony ships will hide behind Earth's moon, keeping their engines cold. Earth's fleet will appear to be in disarray, falling back to protect the weak points in our shield. When the Aurorans commit to their attack, Thomas continued, our ships will sweep in from behind. Their ships will be caught between our combined fleets and their own reflected energy. It's just like that trick you used to play on me, Emma said softly to Thomas. Remember, when you'd hide your toy ships behind your back until exactly the right moment. Thomas nodded. And you'd always tell me I was being too obvious about it. That's why this time, we're using your method of hiding in plain sight. A warning alarm interrupted their conversation. The long-range sensors were showing movement. The main Auroran fleet had begun its advance. They're moving faster than we expected, an officer reported. Time to engagement, 3 hours. Director Miller looked at Emma and Thomas. This plan of yours, you're betting everything on it working. If it fails, we lose both fleets and Earth. It will work, Emma said firmly. Because it has to. Thomas turned to the assembled commanders. Every ship needs to be in position within 2 hours. We've transmitted the exact coordinates to all vessels. One ship out of position could ruin the entire plan. And the shield modifications? Miller asked. Already done, Emma replied. I've run every possible simulation. The network will hold. As the commanders filed out to prepare their ships, Thomas caught Emma's arm. Hey, remember what you used to say when we were kids? Right before we try some crazy new game strategy. Emma smiled, memories flooding back. Win or lose, at least we tried something new. Exactly, Thomas said, looking out at the stars. But this time, we can't lose. The room emptied except for the two of them, standing before the tactical display. Outside, hundreds of ships began moving into position, preparing for humanity's greatest battle. Everything depended on two childhood friends and the games they used to play. Space was silent as the Auroran fleet emerged from hyperspace. Their silver ships filled the void between Earth and Mars, so numerous they looked like a metal cloud. Emma stood at her station on the Star Voyager's bridge, watching the enemy fleet through the main viewport. Her hands were steady now, despite everything that was about to happen. All ships report ready, the communications officer announced. Earth fleet is in defensive formation. Thomas sat in the commander's chair, his face calm. Status of the shield network. Operating at full power, Emma replied, checking her displays. The fake weakness points are showing exactly as we planned. Their scanners should detect them any moment now. They didn't have to wait long. The Auroran fleet began to move, spreading out into their attack formation. Just as Emma and Thomas had predicted, their scanners focused on the apparent gaps in Earth's defenses. They're taking the bait, Thomas said quietly. He opened a channel to all ships. Remember your positions. Not a single ship moves until I mark. The first wave of Auroran ships advanced, their weapons charging. The space around Earth lit up with enemy fire, hundreds of energy beams striking the shield network at once. Emma's hands flew over her controls, monitoring the power levels. Shields holding, she reported. Energy absorption at 60% and rising. Through the viewport, they could see the Auroran ships pressing their attack, concentrating their fire on the apparent weak points. The shields flickered convincingly, making it look like they were about to fail. They're committing more ships to the attack, the tactical officer reported. 80% of their fleet is now engaging. Thomas leaned forward in his chair, just a little more. A massive explosion rocked the ship. One of Earth's defense platforms had overloaded, creating a real hole in the shield network. Emma, Thomas called out. I see it. Her fingers were already moving, rerouting power. The network is adapting. 30 seconds until I can seal the breach. The Aurorans saw the real weakness and immediately shifted their attack. Their entire fleet surged forward, weapons blazing at full power. Now, Thomas shouted, all ships, Execute attack pattern read. From behind Earth's moon, the Nova Colony fleet roared into action. Their engines blazed blue fire as they swept in behind the Auroran fleet. At the same time, Earth's ships stopped their retreat and turned to attack. The trap was sprung. The Auroran fleet found itself caught between two human fleets, with nowhere to retreat. But the real surprise came from Emma's shields. Energy absorption at maximum. She called out, initiating reflection sequence. All the energy the Aurorans had fired at Earth's shields now burst back at them in a massive wave. Their ships, caught off guard, took the full force of their own weapons. Multiple enemy ships disabled, the tactical officer reported. Their formation is breaking. But the Aurorans weren't finished. Their flagship, a massive vessel twice the size of the others, turned its guns on the Star Voyager. Incoming fire, someone shouted. Emma. Thomas said calmly, remember that move you used to do with your defense ships? The one that always beat me. Emma smiled, understanding immediately. Her hands moved across the controls, adjusting shield frequencies faster than she'd ever done before. The Auroran flagship fired. The blast hit the Star Voyager's shields head-on, but instead of trying to absorb or deflect it, Emma's modified shields caught the energy and spun it around the ship, sending it back at the enemy with even more power. The Auroran flagship's shields collapsed under its own reflected energy. Across the battlefield, seeing their flagship vulnerable, the remaining Auroran ships began to retreat. They're running. The bridge crew cheered. Emma looked at Thomas, who was grinning just like he used to when they were kids. Still think the direct approach is always best? She asked. Sometimes, he replied, standing up to look at the retreating enemy fleet. It helps to have someone who knows how to turn it around on them. The celebration in Earth Command's main hall was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. People from Earth and the Nova Colony mixed together, sharing stories and congratulations. Through the tall windows, cleanup crews could be seen collecting debris from the battle, their lights twinkling against the darkness of space. Emma stood in a quiet corner, looking at her tablet. The shield network was still active, but now it was stable, stronger than ever thanks to its integration with Nova Colony technology. A soft chime indicated another Auroran ship had been detected leaving the solar system. They're running scared, Thomas said, appearing beside her with 2 drinks in his hands. He passed one to her. The last reports show them retreating past Neptune. Earth is safe. For now, Emma replied, taking the drink. They'll be back eventually. And we'll be ready. Thomas looked around the hall, where Earth and Colony engineers were already discussing new defense plans. Your shield design changed everything, Em. The Nova Colony wants to implement it across all our worlds. Emma finally put down her tablet. And Earth wants to study your ship's targeting systems. Director Miller is already talking about a joint defense program. They moved to one of the windows, watching Earth rotate slowly below them. The shield network created subtle patterns of light in the atmosphere, like a giant protective bubble around the planet. Do you remember, Thomas said quietly, the day I told you I was leaving for the colony? Emma nodded. You were so excited about space travel. All I could think about was losing my best friend. I wanted to ask you to come with us. He turned to face her. But I knew how much you loved Earth, how much you wanted to protect it. Guess we both ended up doing exactly that. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the background, someone was giving a speech about unity and cooperation between Earth and the colony, but Emma wasn't really listening. I have to go back to the colony, Thomas finally said. There's a lot of work to do, implementing the new defenses. But he hesitated, then smiled. We could use a shield expert. Emma looked at him in surprise. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to protect not just Earth, but all of humanity's worlds. He gestured to the celebrating crowd. Look what we accomplished together in just a few days. Imagine what we could do with more time. Before Emma could answer, Director Miller approached them. Commander Reed, Ms. Hayes, the Joint Defense Council is ready for your briefing. They followed Miller to a conference room where military leaders from both Earth and the colony waited. The holographic display showed all of humanity's settlements, from Earth to the furthest colony outposts. The Auroran Empire now knows we're stronger than they thought, Miller began. But they're not the only threat out there. We need a unified defense network, combining the best of both our technologies. Emma looked at the display, then at Thomas. She thought about their childhood games, about how they had always worked better together than apart. She thought about the battle, about how naturally they had fallen back into that old partnership. I have some ideas about improving the shield network, she said, stepping forward. If we combine it with the colony's long-range sensors. Thomas joined her at the display. We could create an early warning system that covers all our worlds. For the next hour, they outlined their plans, finishing each other's sentences just like they used to. The military leaders watched in amazement as the two friends designed a defense system that would protect all of humanity. Later, as they walked back to the celebration, Thomas asked, "So, does this mean you're coming to the colony?" Emma smiled. "Someone has to keep you from just charging straight at every problem. And someone has to remind you to take a break from shield calculations sometimes." They stopped at the window one last time, looking out at the stars. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, just like they had as kids playing with toy spaceships in a backyard on Earth. Some friendships, they both realized, were meant to last across time and space.